Welcome back to Strong, Confident, and Informed. Today's episode is probably the most personal episode I've ever recorded. I've gone back and forth on whether or not I wanted to share this, not because I'm ashamed of my story, but because so much of it feels deeply personal. And at the same time, I think one of the greatest gifts we can give each other is honesty. Because from the outside, it's really easy to look at somebody's life and assume it all came together naturally. You see where they are today, but you don't see what it took to get there. And if I'm being honest, if I told you everything that's happened in my life over the last 15 years, you might think I was making some of it up. I've actually had people tell me before, Danielle, you should write a book. And every time they say it, I laugh because honestly, sometimes I think the same thing. Not because I think my life has been harder than anyone else's, but because when I look back, there have been so many moments where life has completely changed directions. Moments where I thought, this is it, only to have everything fall apart. And then I'd have to begin again, over and over and over. Looking back now, though, I don't think my life has been defined by the hard things that happened. I think it's been defined by how many times I had to choose to begin again. And that's really what this episode is about. Not hardship, but hope. Not giving up, but learning how to rebuild when life doesn't go according to plan. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that sometimes your greatest strength isn't pushing harder. Sometimes it's simply finding the courage to start over again. So let's start. I was in my 20s when I thought I had my life figured out. And I think we're all in that point in our 20s. I was in a relationship. Things were moving forward. 9 months later, after we started dating, we bought a house together. And at the time, that felt like such a big milestone. You know, when you're younger, you have this picture in your head of how life is supposed to go, right? You meet somebody, you fall in love, you buy a house, eventually get married, maybe have kids. Everything just kind of unfolds, right? That was the picture I had. And when we bought that house, I honestly thought I was stepping into that future. I thought, this is the life I'm building. But sometimes life has a way of showing you that the path you're on isn't actually the one you're meant to stay on. It didn't take long before I started realizing that the relationship wasn't right. And I don't think there was one single moment where everything suddenly became clear. I think it was a lot of little moments over time. A lot of quiet moments where something inside me kept whispering, this isn't the life you want. This isn't how you should be treated. And I ignored that voice for a while because leaving isn't easy, especially when you've already built a life together, right? Especially when you've bought that house together or when you've told everyone everything's great. Sometimes staying feels easier than starting over, even when you know staying is costing you pieces of yourself. Eventually, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I made the decision to leave. And honestly, that was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made. Not because I questioned whether it was the right one to do, but because I knew it was. It was hard because I knew what it was going to cost me. Emotionally, financially, mentally. People hear breakup and they picture two people going their separate ways. That wasn't my reality. My reality looked a lot messier than that because we owned a house together. And neither of us could just pack a bag and disappear overnight. So while everything was being sorted out legally, I actually continued to live in the basement of that house for months. The basement wasn't even finished fully. Picture basic carpeting in some areas of the floor, some were concrete. There was unfinished walls, so no mud or paint on them. It wasn't home anymore. It was simply the place I happened to be sleeping. And every single day I walked upstairs knowing I was living inside a life that had already ended. It's a strange feeling to grieve something that's technically still there. Eventually, I ended up having to hire a lawyer. What I now jokingly call my divorce. It wasn't actually a divorce, but it felt like one. It dragged on for at least 9 months. 9 months of uncertainty, of stress, of wondering how everything was going to work out. And when it was finally over, I walked away with nothing. Actually, less than nothing. Because after lawyer fees and never receiving my down payment back because my partner wanted to stay in the house, I had lost around $16,000. At that point in my life, $16,000 felt enormous. It still does. I had worked hard for that money. I borrowed some of that money. And suddenly, it was gone. I wasn't walking away with a house. I wasn't walking away with savings. I was walking away with debt. And I remember thinking, how am I here? This wasn't the future I pictured. This wasn't the life I planned. This wasn't supposed to happen. Have you ever had one of those moments where you look around at your life and think, I don't even recognize where I am anymore? Maybe it wasn't a relationship. Maybe it was your health or your career or your finances. Maybe it was something completely different. But you look around and think, this wasn't the plan. I think every one of us has likely had that moment. But here's something I've realized looking back now. Walking away with debt was still better than staying and losing myself. And I know that's a hard thing to fully understand until you've lived it. Because on paper, it looked like I lost everything. The house, the money, the future I thought I was building. But I didn't lose everything. I still had me. And sometimes that's the most valuable thing that you can walk away with. I didn't really realize it then. But that decision became the first time in my adult life that I chose myself over comfort. I chose uncertainty over settling. I chose a future I couldn't see instead of a life that no longer felt like mine. And looking back now, that decision changed the entire direction of my life. If I had stayed because it was easier, I never would have met my husband now. I never would have built the business I have today. I never would have moved to Alberta. I never would have become the woman sitting here talking to you. At the time, it felt like my life was falling apart. Looking back, it was actually the beginning of my life coming together. And I think that's one of the hardest parts about growth. When you're living it, it almost never feels like growth. It feels like loss, like uncertainty, feels like grief, or it feels like fear sometimes. You don't get to see the purpose while you're standing in the middle of it. You usually only see it years later when you look back and realize, if that chapter hadn't ended, none of the beautiful chapters that followed would have ever had the chance to begin. So if you're listening to this today and you're standing in the middle of a chapter that feels like it's falling apart, I just want to leave you with this thought before we move into the next part of my story. Just because this chapter hurts doesn't mean it's the end of your story. Sometimes it's simply making room for a better one. So at the time, I thought starting over meant I'd finally learned the lesson. I had no idea life was about to teach me a completely different one. When I walked away from that relationship, I did think that the hardest part was over. I thought, okay, I did the brave thing. I left. Now life is going to get better. And in some ways it did. I had my own place again that I was renting. I was rebuilding things. I was figuring life out. But then something happened that I think a lot of people experience and don't even realize it's happening. I slowly started losing myself. And the scary part wasn't that it happened overnight. It didn't. It happened so gradually that I almost barely noticed it. Have you ever looked back at a season of your life and thought, how did I get here? Not because there was one massive decision, but because there were hundreds of tiny ones. That's exactly what happened to me. I got into another relationship, and I want to be clear, I'm not here to blame another person. This wasn't about someone else making me lose myself. It was about me slowly disconnecting from who I actually was, and the choices I started making reflected that. So I started smoking weed every day. And if you knew me before that season, you probably would have laughed if someone told you that's where I'd end up. Because I was the person who always said, I'll never do that. Never. It just wasn't me. It wasn't what I stood for. Or at least I didn't think it was. But life has a funny way of showing you that when you're hurting, exhausted, disconnected, or simply trying to escape, you'll often reach for whatever gives you temporary relief. And that's exactly what it became for me. It wasn't about partying or having fun. It was about escaping. It became a way to numb out, to quiet everything, to not have to think for a little while. And alongside that, my nutrition completely changed. Fast food became normal. Not once in a while, not as a treat, as a lifestyle. Exercise? Not really. Taking care of myself? Once again, not really. I was surviving. I wasn't living. Looking back now, I don't think I realized how disconnected I had become. Because here's the thing. When unhealthy habits become your normal, they don't feel unhealthy anymore. They just feel normal. And that's the dangerous part. I think sometimes we picture losing ourselves as this dramatic moment, right? Like in a movie. Like one day you're going to wake up and think, I don't know who I am anymore. But that's rarely how it happens. Usually it's quiet, it's subtle. It's choosing convenience over yourself one day, then again the next, then again. Until eventually those small choices become your identity. And honestly, I see this happen with clients all the time. Not necessarily with smoking weed, but just with life, right? Someone starts skipping workouts because work gets busy. Then meal prep disappears. Then they're ordering takeout more often. They stop checking in. Then they stop believing they can actually change. Not because one thing happened, because hundreds of tiny things happened. And before they know it, they're sitting across from me saying, I don't even know where to start anymore. And every time I hear that, I think back to that version of myself, because I've been there too. One of the biggest lessons I've learned is this. You rarely wake up one morning having lost yourself. You lose yourself one decision at a time. And the beautiful part about that is you also find yourself one decision at a time. For me, there wasn't one huge moment where everything suddenly changed. There wasn't some dramatic movie scene where I looked in the mirror and completely transformed my life overnight. It was quieter than that. It was almost like this voice inside of me that kept getting louder. The voice that said, Danielle, this isn't you. Not you're a bad person, not you're failing, just this isn't who you are. And eventually, I got tired, not physically, spiritually, emotionally, mentally. I was exhausted from living a life that wasn't aligned with the person I wanted to become. And I realized something. Nobody was coming to rescue me. Nobody was going to wake up one morning and magically change my life. If I wanted something different, I had to choose something different. That was terrifying because choosing yourself usually means disappointing someone else. It usually means making uncomfortable decisions. It usually means stepping into uncertainty. And uncertainty is scary, even when you know it's the right thing. So I left. Again, I chose myself. Again. And honestly, looking back now, that decision had nothing to do with finding another relationship. It had everything to do with rebuilding my relationship with myself. Because somewhere along the way, I had stopped believing I deserved better. And I think that's what broke my heart the most when I look back. Not that I smoked weed, not that I ate fast food, or not even that I wasn't taking care of myself. It was that I'd accepted a version of my life that was so far below what I truly wanted. I think this is where health and fitness becomes so much deeper than calories and workouts as well. Because when someone tells me they want to lose weight, I don't just hear, I want to lose weight. Sometimes what I really hear is, I want to feel like myself again. I want to feel proud of myself again. I want to trust myself again. I want to believe I'm worth taking care of. And those are very different conversations. Looking back now, I don't think the best decision I ever made was leaving that relationship. I think the best decision I ever made was deciding that I was worth fighting for. Because from that moment on, every decision became less about proving something to other people and more about becoming someone I was proud to be. And that decision is what changed everything. I had no idea at the time, but I was about to meet someone who would show me what a healthy relationship could actually look like. And for the first time in a long time, life finally started feeling hopeful again. I remember thinking, maybe this is it. Maybe the hard part is finally over. Little did I know, life still had some of its biggest lessons waiting for me. So after I made the decision to leave and really start choosing myself, life slowly started changing. Not overnight, but little by little, I started feeling more like myself again. I was taking care of myself, working out, going for walks. I was rebuilding my confidence. I was remembering who Danielle actually was underneath all the stress, all the unhealthy habits, and all the versions of myself that I'd become just trying to survive. And honestly, it felt good. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Then something happened that I didn't expect. I met my husband. And I know people always say, when you know, you know. But honestly, that's exactly how I felt. Our relationship was different. It felt safe. It felt healthy. It felt peaceful. I didn't feel like I had to earn love. I didn't feel like I had to become someone different to be accepted by him. I could just be myself. And after everything I'd experienced before that, I don't think I realized how much I needed that. So we started dating. We fell in love. Eventually we moved in together. And I remember thinking, maybe this is what all those difficult years were leading me toward. It finally felt like life was starting to come together. Like I could finally exhale. But around that same time, life reminded me once again that joy and heartbreak can exist together. A few years earlier, while I was still in my previous relationships, my dad had been diagnosed with cancer. It completely rocked me and our family. If you've ever had someone you love receive a diagnosis like that, you know how quickly your perspective can change. The things that seemed important 5 minutes ago suddenly aren't. You realize how fragile life really is, right? The incredible thing is he beat it. He was in remission. And I remember how relieved I had felt. It honestly felt like we'd been given another chance. Like maybe life was finally settling down. Like maybe this chapter was behind us. But then a few months after I started dating the man who would become my husband, we found out that cancer had come back. And at this time, it was different. This time, the conversations seemed to be a little different. The hope kind of felt a little different. And it all happened right amidst COVID as well. One of the things I'm incredibly grateful for is that my dad got to meet my husband. Not many times. I think it was only about 4, but he met him. And that means more to me than I can explain. I often wish they would have had years together. I wish my dad could have seen us get married, seen us buy our home, seen everything we've built. But I'm grateful they had those moments, even if they were far too few. Shortly after I moved in with my husband, my dad passed away. And losing him is still one of the hardest things I've ever gone through. People often say that grief gets easier, and I don't know if I'd say it's easier. I think you just learn how to carry it. It changes shape, it changes how often it shows up, but it never really leaves. There are still moments where something exciting happens, and my first instinct is, I'd love to tell Dad. I want to tell him. And then I remember, those moments still catch me off guard sometimes. One of the biggest things grief taught me is that life isn't either happy or sad. Sometimes it's both. I was falling in love with the man I'd eventually marry while losing one of the most important people in my life. Those emotions existed together. I could feel incredibly grateful and completely heartbroken. I could laugh and then cry an hour later. I think we often believe we have to pick one emotion, but life doesn't work like that. Around that same season, another layer started unfolding. You may remember me talking in another episode about my accident with my Jeep. The accident itself had happened a couple years earlier, but now I was starting to deal with lingering effects I didn't even realize were connected. And I think some of it also was layered in there with everything else that was going on at the time. I developed TMJ. My neck was still causing me issues because it was misaligned. My vision was becoming blurry. At first, I didn't understand what was happening. I just knew something didn't feel right. Imagine trying to navigate grief while your own body suddenly doesn't feel like something you can completely trust. It was scary, especially with driving, because now I wasn't just managing anxiety from the accident. I was also trying to understand why my vision wasn't always clear and dealing with everything else that was wrapped up during that time. Looking back now, I realize something important though. Life rarely hands us one challenge at a time. It likes to stack them. One thing happens, then another, before you've even fully processed the first one. And I think that's why I have so much compassion for people now. Because when people tell me they're struggling, when someone tells me they're struggling, I know there are probably layers I can't see. Maybe they're grieving. Maybe they're worried about a parent or a friend. Maybe they're carrying financial stress. Maybe they're so exhausted from life. Maybe they're silently fighting battles that nobody knows about. From the outside, we might say they just need to get back to the gym. But what if the workout isn't actually the hardest part? What if getting out of bed was? What if making dinner was? What if simply making it through the day took everything they had? And that's one of the biggest things coaching has taught me. People don't just need accountability. They need understanding. But, and this is really important, understanding doesn't mean lowering our belief in what someone is capable of. It means meeting them where they are while helping them keep moving forward. That's a very different thing than letting them just stay stuck. Looking back now, I realize those seasons of my life quietly built something inside me. Not because I wanted them to, not because I would have chosen them, but because every difficult season was teaching me resilience long before I even knew I was going to need it. And honestly, I thought maybe I'd finally earned a season where life would simply be easy. I had found my person, we got married, we bought what we called our forever home, and we started dreaming about growing our family. I could picture birthdays, Christmas mornings, little feet running through the house. I remember thinking, this is finally the chapter I've been waiting for. I had no idea that my next lesson wouldn't be grieving somebody I lost. It would be grieving someone I hadn't even gotten the chance to meet yet. So after everything we'd been through, it finally felt like we had made it. Like I said, my husband and I got married. We bought that house that we called our forever home. And I remember walking through that house thinking, this is it. This is where we're going to build our family. I could picture it. Christmas mornings, like I said, birthday parties, kids running down the hall, family dinners, a backyard full of laughter and getting to play with them outside playing catch and stuff. I didn't just buy a house. I bought into the future I thought we were about to live. I think that's something we all do. We don't just make plans. We emotionally move into them. We start living inside a future before it ever arrives. And that's beautiful until life writes a different story. We started trying to have a baby. At first, we weren't worried. Everyone tells you it can take time, so you think, okay, it'll happen next month. Then next month comes and nothing. Then another month, nothing. Then another, still nothing. And somewhere along the way, trying became struggling. Struggling turned into appointments. Appointments became now testing. And testing became answers. But answers also became more questions. Eventually, we found out that getting pregnant wasn't going to be as simple as we had imagined and hoped. That was devastating enough. But then came the next decision, IVF. If you've never gone through IVF, it's a bit difficult to explain. People often think it's just a medical procedure, but it's not. It's full of emotions. It's very physical. It's a big financial burden, and it's exhausting, to say the least. It becomes your entire schedule, your entire life. It's your conversations, your calendar. Your entire hope is riding on this, your disappointment. Over and over again, it's everything. Every appointment that you go to carries hope, or every phone call that you get carries hope. And then every embryo that you may have from that carries hope. And into that transfer, you carry hope. And every time something doesn't work or you don't get the news that you want, you have to somehow pick yourself back up and still believe again. That's exhausting. Not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. I don't think people realize how much waiting also exists inside infertility. You're constantly waiting for appointments. Even just that first one, it took over 3 months to get an appointment, which may seem like a short amount of time, but when you're waiting to figure out what's going on, that's a long time. And it honestly took a year after that before we started going into figuring out what our path was with IVF. You're waiting for those appointments. You're waiting for results. You're waiting for your blood work, for those phone calls to tell you what's happening next or what good or bad news is coming. You're waiting for your next cycle so you can start something. You're waiting for hope, for heartbreak. It's a really strange place to live because your life keeps moving. Well, at the same time, it feels like it's standing completely still. We had 2 embryo transfers. Both of them failed. One ended as a chemical pregnancy. For a brief moment, I got to believe that I was pregnant. For a brief moment, everything changed. Then it was gone. It's amazing how quickly your heart can attach itself to something that you've never even met. People will sometimes ask, how are you doing now? And honestly, it depends on the day. Some days I'm okay. Some days something catches me completely off guard. A pregnancy announcement, or a family at the grocery store, even a child laughing and having fun, a holiday or a birthday. Certain moments still hurt, just differently now. One of the hardest parts wasn't just losing the pregnancies. It was grieving the future we'd already imagined. Remember how I told you we bought our forever home? Well, after infertility, that house started feeling different. Instead of imagining children running through those halls, I started seeing empty bedrooms. Instead of hope, there was just reminders. Every room became connected to a future that wasn't happening. And that was incredibly difficult. Because the place that was supposed to represent our biggest dream started reminding me every single day of our biggest heartbreak. I don't think people talk enough about grieving something that never happened. People understand grieving after a loss, but grieving the life you thought you'd have, that's a different kind of grief. You're mourning birthdays that never happened, Christmas mornings that never happened, first days of school that never happened, conversations you'll never get to have, memories you'll never make. It's grieving an invisible future. And honestly, that's one of the loneliest kinds of grief. Because the world keeps moving. People don't always see it. There's no funeral, no meal train, no cards. Life simply expects you to continue. And somehow you do. Eventually, my husband and I made one of the hardest decisions we've ever made. We decided to take a break. Not because we didn't want children anymore. Not because we stopped caring. Because we needed to breathe. For 3 years, our lives had revolved around trying to become parents. At some point, we realized we had stopped living the life we already had. That decision wasn't giving up. And I want to make that really clear. People sometimes hear taking a break and assume it means quitting. For us, it meant choosing ourselves again. It meant allowing ourselves to heal. It meant remembering that we were husband and wife before we were ever trying to become mom and dad. That season taught me something I'll never forget. Sometimes strength isn't pushing harder. Sometimes strength is knowing when to pause. Sometimes courage looks like continuing treatment. Sometimes courage looks like saying we need space. Both require bravery. I also think infertility completely changed the way I coach. Because before, I understood hard work. After infertility, I understood emotional capacity. I understood what it feels like to desperately want something and still not be able to control the outcome. I understood that sometimes people aren't lacking discipline, they're carrying heartbreak. And heartbreak is heavy. It's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about helping people build habits they can actually sustain. Because life doesn't stop. Stress doesn't stop. Grief doesn't stop. Unexpected things don't stop. The goal isn't to build habits that only work when life is easy. The goal is to build habits that are strong enough to carry you when life is hard. Looking back now, I don't think infertility only changed our future. I think it changed me. It softened me a bit. It humbled me. It deepened my empathy. It taught me that some prayers are answered differently than we expected and hoped. And while I still don't understand every part of that journey, I do know this. It made me a better coach, a better listener, a better wife, and I hope a better human. There was a time when I believed that once one hard season ended, life would finally become easy. But by this point, I was starting to understand something different. Life wasn't asking me to become someone who never faced hardships. It was asking me to become someone who could keep choosing hope even after disappointment. And as hard as infertility was, it wouldn't be the last time life asked us to begin again. After everything we'd been through, I think I reached a point where I stopped asking, why does this keep happening to me? Not because I had all the answers, not because life suddenly made sense, but because I realized something. Life wasn't asking me to have those answers. It was asking me to decide who I wanted to become because of everything I'd been through. And those are two very different questions. If I'm being completely honest, there were so many moments over the years where it would have been easier to stop believing, to stop hoping, to stop trying, to become bitter, to let disappointment harden me. I would have had every reason to. If someone looked at my life on paper, that could probably make a pretty good argument for why I should have become cynical. Relationships that ended, financial loss, my dad, the accident, infertility, family relationships that changed. There were so many opportunities to believe that life was just unfair. And trust me, there were days I questioned it. But every single time life knocked me down, there was this quiet voice inside me that kept asking, okay, now what? Not why me, but who do you want to be now? And looking back, I think that question has shaped my life more than anything else. Because every chapter forced me to make a decision. Was I going to let that chapter define me? Or was I going to let it develop me? Those are not the same things. I remember making the decision to move to Alberta. And if you've ever picked up your entire life and moved somewhere new, you know how scary that is. You're leaving behind everything that's familiar. Your friends, your routines, your comfort zone, the places that feel like home. You're essentially saying, I don't know exactly what's waiting for me, but I'm willing to find out. That takes courage. And honestly, there were moments where I questioned it. Was this the right decision? Would we actually build our life here? Would my business survive? Would I find community and friends again? Those thoughts crossed my mind because they always do when you're starting somewhere new. Then I started teaching classes, and I remember showing up, setting everything up, being excited, thinking this is going to be great. And then honestly, nobody came. Nobody showed up to my classes at first. I laughed about it afterwards. But if I'm honest, there was disappointment too, because wherever you put your heart into something, of course you hope people show up. I could have looked at that and thought, maybe this isn't meant for you. But instead, I asked myself, what can I learn from this? Because that's become the question I ask over and over again in my life. Not why isn't this working, but what is this trying to teach me? The same thing happened with starting this podcast. Do you think I felt completely confident recording my first episode? Not even close. I questioned whether anyone would even listen. Whether I had anything worth saying, or if I was good enough to do it. Whether my voice mattered. Even, am I going to sound awkward? Should I even do it? But I did it anyway, because I've learned something over the years. The things that end up changing your life usually begin before you feel ready. The same thing happened with my running. People see me now training for a half marathon, but they don't see the version of me who wondered if she could even run 30 minutes without stopping. They don't see the first run, the first uncomfortable workout, the self-doubt, the learning, the days where I questioned whether I was cut out for this or not. They only see where I am now. And isn't that true for all of us? We compare our beginning to someone else's middle or someone else's ending without realizing they once stood exactly where you stand now. Unsure, uncomfortable, wondering if they could actually do it. I also think moving to Alberta taught me something else. Home isn't always a place. Sometimes home is the person you've become. Because I've lived in many different houses, different cities, towns, provinces now. Some of those places held incredible memories. Some held heartbreak. But the one thing that came with every single time was me. And I think that's what resilience really is. It's realizing that your peace isn't found in your circumstances. It's found in the person you've become through those circumstances. Now, I'd be lying if I told you life suddenly became perfect after you moved. It didn't. There have still been hard conversations. Family relationships have changed. Some relationships have ended, unfortunately. Others have become more complicated. And honestly, that's been painful too. Because when you care deeply about people, those things hurt. They leave a mark. But here's what's different now. I don't look at difficult seasons the same way I used to. Years ago, I used to think hardship meant something was wrong. Now, I understand that hardship is simply part of being human. Every single person listening to this podcast is carrying something. Some of it might be visible, but most of it isn't. That's why I've stopped asking, why is this happening? And instead I ask, what kind of person do I want to be while this is happening? That question changes everything because it gives me my power back. I can't control everything life throws at me. Believe me, I've tried, but what I can control is the way I respond. And I think that's one of the greatest lessons fitness has taught me too. You can't control the scale every morning. You can't control whether life throws you a stressful week. You can't control injuries or illness or loss or disappointment. But you can control whether you continue showing up. You can control whether you keep promises to yourself. You can control whether you choose to believe this chapter is the end or simply the place where your next chapter begins. Sometimes people ask me, how do you stay positive? And honestly, I don't. Not all the time. I'm not positive every day. I still cry. I still get frustrated. I still question things. I have moments where I wonder why life unfolded the way it did. But optimism isn't pretending everything is okay. Optimism is believing that something good can still come from what isn't okay. Those are different things. And I think that's what I've spent my entire adult life learning. Not how to avoid hard things, but how to keep my heart open despite them. Looking back, every single chapter of my life has asked me the same question. Are you willing to begin again? And somehow, every single time, the answer has been yes. Not because it was easy, because staying where I was would have cost me even more. Looking back now, I don't think my story is really about heartbreak or infertility or loss or starting over. I think my story has always been about one thing: the decision to keep becoming the woman my future was waiting for. And I think that's the lesson I hope every person listening takes with them. So as I was sitting down to write this episode, I kept asking myself, what do I actually want people to take away from my story? Because if I'm honest, I don't want you to leave this episode thinking, wow, Danielle has been through a lot. That actually isn't the point at all here. The point isn't how many difficult things I've experienced. The point is what those difficult things taught me. Because I truly believe if they taught me something, maybe they can teach you something too. When I look back over my life, I don't see one long story. I see chapters. Some chapters were exciting, some were heartbreaking, some were incredibly lonely, some were filled with hope, and some I would gladly relive. Others I wouldn't wish on anyone. But every single chapter eventually came to an end. Everyone. Even the ones I was convinced would last forever. I remember sitting in that unfinished basement thinking, how is this my life? I remember wondering how I was ever going to recover financially, how I was ever going to trust someone again, how I was ever going to feel happy again. At the time, I couldn't see this chapter. I couldn't see Alberta. I couldn't see my husband. I couldn't see my business. I couldn't see this podcast. All I could see was the basement. When I was smoking weed every day and eating fast food because it was easier than dealing with what I was feeling, I couldn't see this version of me either. If someone had told me then that one day I'd become a health and fitness coach, I honestly think I think I would have laughed. Not because I didn't think coaching was possible, but because I didn't believe I was capable of becoming that person. When my dad died, I couldn't imagine a world where that hurt wouldn't consume me forever. When we were going through infertility, I couldn't imagine ever walking into that spare bedroom without feeling sadness. When I moved to Alberta, I couldn't imagine this place feeling 100% like home. When I started my business, I couldn't imagine people trusting me enough to coach them. Every single chapter felt permanent while I was living it, but none of them were. And I think that's something we all forget when we're hurting. We make the mistake that the chapter is the entire book. We convince ourselves, this is my life now. I'll always feel this way. Things are never going to change. Maybe this is just who I am. But what if it isn't? What if you're standing in the middle of a chapter that hasn't finished being written yet? One of the biggest lessons coaching has taught me is that people do the exact same thing with their health. They gain weight and suddenly the story becomes, I've always struggled with my weight. They stop working out for a few months and suddenly it's, I'm just not consistent anymore. They overeat on the weekend and suddenly it's, I have no self-control. One event becomes an identity. One chapter becomes the entire book. But can I tell you something? I've coached women who believed they would never enjoy exercise. Today, they train because they love how it makes them feel. I've coached women who said, I've failed every diet I've ever tried. And today, they don't diet anymore because they've built habits they can actually sustain. I've coached women who couldn't imagine themselves running for a minute. And now they're running 5Ks. Not because they're special, because they stopped believing that one chapter defined them. And honestly, I've had to do the exact same thing. There were so many opportunities in my life to create an identity around my pain. I could have become the woman who got cheated out of $16,000, the woman whose dad died, the woman who couldn't have children. Those things happened to me, but they are not who I am. That's a big difference. I think one of the most dangerous things we can do is build our identity around our hardest chapter. Because if you believe your identity is your pain, you'll unknowingly protect it. You'll keep looking for evidence that supports it. You'll keep telling yourself the same story. You'll keep expecting the same outcome. Not because you want to stay stuck, because our brains like familiar stories, even if they're painful ones. One of the biggest mindset shifts I've ever had was realizing I get to decide what meaning I give my experiences. Did infertility break me? Or did it deepen my compassion? Did my breakup ruin my future? Or did it create space for the man I was actually meant to marry? Was losing $16,000 the worst financial mistake of my life? Or was it the tuition I paid to learn that my peace is worth more than money? I know those are hard questions, but they're powerful ones. And please, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying everything happens for a reason. There are still things in my life that I don't understand. There are prayers I wish had been answered differently. There are conversations I wish had gone another way. And there's people I still miss. And there's dreams I still grieve. I'm not pretending those things don't hurt. They do. Some of them probably always will. But here's what I know. Pain can exist without becoming your identity. Loss can exist without stealing your future. Disappointment can exist without taking away your hope. Because hope isn't pretending life is easy. Hope is believing there is still goodness ahead, even when you can't see it yet. If there's one thing my life has taught me, it's that your future is built by the decisions you make after disappointment, not before it. Anyone can keep moving when life is going according to plan. Character is built when it isn't. I think about my clients a lot when I say this. Sometimes they'll apologize to me because they had a hard week. They'll say, I only got one workout in, or I haven't been tracking my food like I should, or I feel like I'm failing. And I always want to remind them, you're not failing because life got hard. You're only failing if you decide the story ends there. Because one difficult week is just one chapter. One missed workout is one page. One setback is one paragraph. It doesn't get to write the ending unless you hand it the pen. And maybe that's what I want to leave you with today. Not motivation, because motivation comes and goes. And not even confidence, because confidence is built over time. What I want you to leave with is perspective. If you're in a hard chapter right now, please don't assume that it's your whole story. Please don't make permanent decisions based on temporary pain. Don't convince yourself that because life doesn't look the way you imagined, it still can't become something beautiful. Because if there's anything my life has taught me, it's that the life I have today looks like absolutely nothing like the life I planned, not even close. And yet, when I look around now, I don't wish I could go back. I don't wish I had stayed in the house. I don't wish I had settled. I don't wish I had stopped trying. I don't wish I had given up after infertility. And I don't wish I had let fear keep me from moving to Alberta. Because every chapter, even the ones that broke my heart, shaped the woman sitting here talking to you today. And despite everything, I still believe there's more ahead. Not because life has suddenly become easy, but because I've learned something that no circumstance can take away from me. I've learned that I can begin again. Again and again and again. So if you're listening to this today and you're standing in the middle of a chapter that you've never would have chosen for yourself, I just want you to borrow a little bit of my hope until you can find your own. Because your story isn't over. This chapter is not the ending. It's simply the place where your next beginning is waiting. Thank you for letting me share my story with you today. It wasn't easy to record, but even if one person listening realized that they still have another chapter left to write, then every vulnerable word was worth it. I'll talk to you in the next episode.